Tom and Carolyn Anderson have found a young man to take part in the program this afternoon, very briefly, but I trust pungently. And it's a pleasure to be able to present an outstanding young American conservative, Mr. Douglas Joy, who comes to us from North Carolina. He's active there in the American Party. He is doing his best to survive the difficulties of being subjected to the educational process at Chapel Hill, and I think he's doing very well. But it's a great pleasure to have with us this afternoon Mr. Douglas Joy.
Thank you, and I can surely call you my fellow Americans. There are two Americas, one real, one imaginary. In the imaginary America, all the thinkers, all the good guys, and all the young people are socialists, radicals, and collectivist activists. There is a good-hearted, though sometimes muddle-headed and over-idealistic Democrat Party run by Teddy and George, and that ain't Wallace. Then there is a more practical, thrifty Republican Party run by Rip-On Richard I, and a gang of crooked plumbers who couldn't quite stop the flood at the Watergate, who are stemming the tide of communism by buying the friendship of history's champion butchers and leading us gradually into a new world order of peace, brotherly love, abundance, health, and all those good things by controlling our once productive economy tighter and tighter. Of course, in imaginary America, there is no American Party. There is no patriotic movement or Americanist cause. Like the spinster filling out the questionnaire, when she came to the blank labeled children, she wrote, "None to speak of." If you want to see the real America, turn off the TV. Wrap a herring in the conspiracy's controlled newspapers. Pollute the air by burning Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Reports, Reader's Digest, and any other publications run by members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And just open your front door. There is the real America, full of good people who want to earn their own way and help their neighbors individually without a bureaucrat in between, who want to worship God in a church that tells you what He says in His own words, not a bunch of communist propaganda pretending to be a sermon. Something bad is happening to our real America today. Make no mistake about it. What the poet Rudyard Kipling saw happen to his once great nation is happening to ours today with breakneck speed. If it weren't for dedicated men and women who were busy in our cause long before you and I came along, it would be all over. But this fight, as our great Tom Anderson says, isn't over until we quit. And we aren't quitting, ever. We are going to win and restore this free republic to its destined greatness. We are not going to win because Mrs. Joy's little boy stand up here today and tells you so. We are going to win with God's help because we are going to build the nationwide force that will win. And with this force, we are going to do precisely what we must do in order to win. I have the pleasure of introducing the introducer of our speaker this afternoon. That's a pleasure usually saved for Colonel Bunker, but they decided to give it to a private today, so here I am. Our introducer is Mr. B.D. Robinson of St. Augustine, Florida. He is a former treasurer of the American Party of Florida. He is now the chairman of the American Party of Florida. He founded the Constitution Party in 1964 in Florida after the defeat of Barry Goldwater. That is now the Florida American Party. He has been in the conservative movement for many years, He sponsors many conservative radio programs in Florida, like the Dan Smoot Report. He is one of the few men in politics, now write this down, he is one of the few men in politics who is not afraid of the gospel of Jesus Christ. He is also a farmer, and so I guess that makes him one of these people that isn't on welfare. How crazy can they get? But ladies and gentlemen, here's Mr. B.D. Robinson.
Thank you, Doug. My trip from Florida to Boston would have been well worth it had I not met anyone here but Doug. Isn't it wonderful to see these young people here? And to Colonel Bunker and Anna McKinney, Dr. Hargrove Norris, a great conservative and nano-communist from St. Augustine, Florida, asked me to give you both his best wishes and to tell you that he wished that he could be here today. But Dr. Norris is building a private hospital. He's tired of having the government tell him what he has to do. And he's had a fight down there, even among other doctors. But he's got a private hospital, and he's going, and he hopes to be here next year. Ladies and gentlemen, it's indeed a privilege and a great honor for me to be able to introduce such a great American this afternoon. I know that there's no use for me to tell you about his background. Most of you know that he was born and raised in the state of Tennessee, that he's a graduate of Vanderbilt University, that he served his country. He wasn't a draft dodger in World War II. Most of you know that after he came out of the services, he borrowed money on his home, and he went into the printing business. And at one time, he owned the largest group of farm magazines in the country, with a circulation of 750,000. You know that he's now the national chairman of the American Party. You know that he has received many distinguished awards, Freedom Foundation awards among others. But I didn't accept this great honor to come up here and tell you about his past. You know, in the Word of God, in the book of Proverbs, it says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Now I want to say a few words about the American Party's national chairman before he talks to you. I've known this man, followed his career for a long time. One of the first speeches I ever heard him make was at the National Indignation Convention. You remember when Eisenhower was training the communist pilots in Texas? But I've come to know him real well in the last few years, especially since last August out in Louisville, Kentucky. One of the things that I, too, can say about Tom Anderson is that he knows Jesus Christ as his personal Savior. I don't know how much Bible doctrine he knows, but I'm sure that if he didn't know it before last August, he knows it now, that Satan is the ruler of this world and will be until Jesus Christ returns. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask of you one thing. I know that you have heard about some of the squabbles that take place in political parties. There hadn't been a night since the Louisville Convention that I haven't gone to the throne of grace and asked God to guide and help Tom Anderson. And I hope as you go out of this hall that you will pray for him, because he's a man that took this job not seeking any political office. Tom Anderson is not interested in Tom Anderson. Tom Anderson is interested in the freedom and the liberties that you and I inherited. He's interested in leaving behind him those great freedoms for his grandchildren, for his children and his grandchildren. You know, I have one more reason to fight for constitutional government and freedom and liberty. My 7th grandchild was born in Richmond, Virginia yesterday. Me being the chairman of the American Party of Florida does not make me by any means a politician. As you have already found out, I am an American, and I intend to always live, and if necessary, die to be an American. I want to ask you one other thing before our speaker speaks this afternoon. How many of you heard Dr. John Grady, Mayor of Belle Glade, Florida, speak the other night? How many of you would like to see him become governor of Florida or United States Senator from the state of Florida? How many of you, regardless of what state you live in, would go out and raise $1,000 for John Grady to become governor or United States Senator from the state of Florida? It can be done. Don't tell me it can't be done. I live in one of the poorest counties in the state of Florida. I come from a county that has 34,000 people in it. I'm not proud of it. 11,000 of them are drawing food stamps. And I don't know about you, but I'm filled up to here with working and sending money to Washington and having it come back to feed people and give people that never have worked, are not working now, and never intend to work. I know that you are tired of listening to me, and you didn't come in here this afternoon to listen to me, so I'm going to turn this program over to the next speaker, our national chairman. But before I do, I want to say one thing. Tom Anderson believes in the same thing that Ben Robinson believes in. If you've ever seen any of my advertisement, I have two quotations. One, I give credit to Dr. Howard Kushner, that right is right, though all people be against it, and wrong is wrong, though all people vote for it. And the other one is by Dan Smoot. I love America probably more than other people do, because it's only here have I enjoyed the freedom and the liberty to become whatever I'm capable of being, and no man has a right to ask for more. These are the principles that our national chairman of the American Party believe in. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tom Anderson.
Thank you.
The extravagance of that introduction and reception reminds me of the country boy from Georgia who moved from the sticks into the big city and got fabulously rich, and he went society in a big way. And one evening he was having a very formal dinner in his mansion for 16 people, and his little brother, straight from the sticks, blew in unexpectedly. He hadn't seen him in 10 years, nothing to do but to invite little brother to dinner. They served the first course. The soup was unbearably hot, and little brother took a big mouthful of it and just spit it out across the table. And the stunned guests looked around silently, and little brother grinned and said, "Some darn fools would have swallowed that." Hasn't this been a stupendous program up to now? Up to now, that is. I sort of feel like an Egyptian mummy pressed for time, because they've got to clean out this auditorium after a while. Otherwise, I'd be tempted to make a speech. Some speakers don't like to follow great speakers like Dr. Bob Jones. Actually, I'd rather follow a good speaker than a bad speaker. The other night, I followed a bad speaker, and all during my speech, they kept on booing him. It was the last football game of the season. A lowly sub approached the coach and begged to start the game. He had never been in a game. The coach thought, well, he's the most popular man on the squad. It'll do a great thing for the morale of the team. I'll just start him. On the opening kickoff, the sub raced down the field and made the tackle unassisted. He continued to play like an All-American, and the coach just couldn't take him out. With a few seconds left and the score tied, the sub made a sensational tackle behind the goal line and won the game. He was carried off the field on the shoulders of his teammates. The coach rushed into the locker room, said, "Son, what in the world came over you? You never played like that." The boy said, "Well, Coach, 3 days ago, my father died. He had been blind all his life. Today, for the first time in heaven, he was watching." I believe that our founding fathers are watching us today. The whole world is watching us because we are what stands between the world and slavery. If the lamp of freedom is blown out in America, the world will be thrown into darkness. If we have what it takes, morality and courage, we will destroy that diabolical conspiracy of hate that is communism and the evil conspiracy behind it. We will win because as Christian soldiers, we are prepared to fight, work, and pray for what is right. And if Christ be with us, who can be against us? Let us never forget that this country can't be saved by a strong man at the top or even by a political party. This country can only be saved by a spiritual rebirth. Benjamin Franklin recognized the truth when he said, "He who shall introduce into public affairs the principles of primitive Christianity will revolutionize the world." I saw a bumper sticker the other day. It said, "God is back, and is he mad?" If America were a Christian nation, there could be no takeover. Our free republic cannot survive the depredations of the Democrat and Republican parties as presently constituted. We must develop a strong new party dedicated to the old verities, which made America the envy of the world, which gave us the highest standard of living ever achieved in the annals of man, and the highest degree of freedom ever attained by mankind. I've been asked many times, how did you come to this? Because my country is on the brink of socialism, insolvency, and surrender. And many people still won't believe it. Remind me of the drunk on the Titanic who said, "I ordered ice, but this is ridiculous." But the Eskimos are very experienced in dealing with wolf packs. They plant, handle down in the ice, razor-sharp knives, and coat the blades generously with seal blood. The wolves smell the blood and lick the knives and cut their tongues. This brings on a seemingly inexhaustible supply of good warm blood, free. And the wolves stand there licking until they drop in their tracks from loss of blood and freeze to death in the snow. The Eskimos on the Potomac have had their knives out for us for years. And we are licking away something even more precious than blood, our freedom. The federal government will spend in this fiscal year something like $237 billion. And that's more money than 32 presidents, from George Washington through half the third term of fraudulent deficit Roosevelt, spent in 153 years. And we who oppose this fiscal insanity are accused of being idealists who want perfection, like the old maid who'd waited so long for the right man to come along. And her little nephew said, Annie waited so long for a ship to come in that her pier collapsed. Some among us even condemned Teddy Kennedy for wearing that neck brace to the Pinckney funeral. He had to do it to hold his head up. But an Arkansas farmer wrote this recently to the Collector of Internal Revenue. I received your letter about what I owe you. Now be patient. I ain't forgot you. And as soon as folks pay me, I'll pay you. But if this was Judgment Day, and you're no more prepared to meet your God than I am to meet your account, then you sure going to hell. And that's not a bad idea. The way taxes are in this country now, it'd soon be, you might as well marry for love, I guess. Our total commitment in this country, including veterans' benefits, Social Security, and everything bought and unpaid for, public and private, is more than $2 trillion. Just to contemplate that makes you turn as pale as an undertaker's apprentice. The only way we will ever get our government out of the red is to get the reds out of the government. We are bankrupt. And bankrupts can't carry the rest of the world on their shoulders. The way the price of groceries keep going up, it'll soon be cheaper to eat money. Karl Marx said, spend them to death. And they are. But they don't care, the collectivists. Their program is one debt, one nation, one citizenship, one church, and one firing squad. On a bitterly cold day at Valley Forge, General Washington sank to one knee and asked for divine guidance. Later, he met with his military leaders, and with tears in his eyes, not tears of fear or failure, but tears of pride in the heroes surrounding him and in our new republic, he gave a clear and simple command: put none but Americans on guard tonight. Our nation needs that order now more than it did then. We need Americans on guard in the high echelons of our government. Now, I want to make it clear right in the beginning that any statements I make here today will be neither pro-Republican nor pro-Democrat. I dislike both parties equally. Evidently, George Wallace believes the Democrat Party can be saved. I think saving the Democrat Party is sort of like making a lady out of Bella Abzug. It's too late. Changing from Nixon to Teddy Kennedy or Nelson Rockefeller would be like leaving a soiled diaper on the baby and changing the safety pin. Somebody told me the other day that Teddy Kennedy's mother-in-law wore a black armband to his wedding. I was asked many times during our past campaign, well, won't you agree that Nixon and McGovern are 180 degrees apart? And I said, well, absolutely not. I might agree they're 360 degrees apart, but not 180. Their major goals are the same, and always have been. I was asked this morning, how come the newspapers were backing Nixon? I said, well, why shouldn't they? Pravda did. They knew who could get the job done. Switching from Johnson to Nixon is sort of like getting a divorce and getting custody of your wife's parents. In criticizing conservatives who contend that Nixon is lesser of evils, one editor said recently, when you are drowning, you're foolish to pass up a log to get to a rowboat you can't possibly reach. Well, not when the log is not only covered with water moccasins, but can't possibly support your weight. I still say we'd have been better off with George McGovern or Hubert Humphrey, because they couldn't have done it. And isn't it appalling that this man Nixon still carries a conservative image? Some people still think he's conservative. Calling him a conservative ought to be a violation of the truth in packaging law. For conservatives to support Richard Nixon is as ridiculous as a bunch of Indians applauding a John Wayne movie. Far from being anti-communist, which many people now think, Nixon admires communism and communist leaders and always has. He said, according to an Associated Press dispatch of February 3, 1964, that Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, without qualification, is the most able all-around world leader today. Khrushchev was responsible for more murders than Hitler, but Nixon never said that. The Democrats and Republicans today differ mainly on how to socialize our country, and then accuse us of being people who are never satisfied and want perfection. Life, of course, is full of concessions. For example, most people, when building a house, give up one of the bathrooms they'd love to have so that they can have two closets that they must have. They buy imitation paneling, telling themselves that without such corner cutting, they wouldn't get a house at all. But unlike the house builder, the politician finds that each compromise makes the next compromise easier. He tells himself that he can't be a statesman unless he gets elected, and he can't get elected unless he does what he knows is wrong, occasionally, when that's where the votes are. Eventually, his obsession is not ideology. His obsession is staying there, whatever it takes. And then one day his house comes tumbling down, and he never knows which termite took the fatal bite, nor which compromise was his undoing. But the sad part is not his undoing, but the undoing of the innocents and our free republic. Under both Republicans and Democrats, our government, through abandonment of the gold standard, through confiscatory taxation, through continuous deficit spending, through fantastic giveaways at home and abroad, through actual sponsorship of anarchy and insurrection across our land, through deliberate subsidization of the enemy, our leaders are destroying the land of the free and the home of the brave, and they are doing it deliberately. Our main menace is not the big red army from without, but the big pink army within. The liberals now like to talk about Armageddon, the last war mentioned in the Bible. If we are near Armageddon, who brought us there? The liberals remind me of the boy who murdered his mother and daddy and then threw himself on the mercy of the court because he was an orphan. A former Air Force general told me that he anticipates that some morning the TV networks will announce that the Soviet missiles have been sprinkled up and down our shorelines, about 500 miles out, that they'll lob one missile over and announce that was for practice. We have 500 more on target. Surrender immediately, or else. Will our leaders surrender us? Whoever surrenders us will replace the Soviets as the number one enemy. Many dismiss the Russian threat with the thought that the American war-making potential is inevitable. Maybe it is still the greatest, and Custer was the greatest general at Little Big Horn. Now let's have a short question and answer. Question: Do we as a free republic have an enemy or enemies? Answer, only a fool would say no. Question then, who is the enemy? Answer, the enemy is whoever is working to destroy or change our form of government, our constitution, our way of life, or the so-called establishment by any method other than provided for in the Constitution of the United States, the greatest freedom document ever devised by man. Question, who then is guilty? Answer, all communists, anarchists, Marxists, guerrillas, fascists, all left of communists, a high percentage of college professors and administrators and people who, for whatever reason, deliberately help the enemy. People like Senator Fulbright, Nelson Rockefeller, Cyrus Eaton, Justice William Douglas, Armand Hammer, and Richard Nixon. Question, how does the dictionary define treason? Answer, giving aid and comfort to the enemy. In Russia, merely trying to leave is treason. Question, then why don't we have treason trials in this country? I think they are overdue. With the end of our free republic possibly so near, how ironic and how historical that the majority of the American people should not even know who their betrayers are. Just before the Battle of New Orleans, an unusually dense fog descended on fields outside the city where General Andrew Jackson's army was to make its stand. As General Jackson rode out to inspire his poorly equipped troops, a young soldier inquired, "But, General, sir, how can I fight and defend myself against an enemy I can't see?" The general replied, "Sooner or later, your enemy will show himself, and you will know what to do." Then, looking upward as if for guidance, he added, "And in your future life, if you survive this, and by God you will be comforted by many unseen enemies of your hard-fought liberty. But they will show themselves in time enough to destroy them. We have seen the enemy, and they are our leaders." Impeachment for Watergate? No. Watergate merely involves perjury, stealing, bribery, prostitution, tax evasion, and lying. If we are going to impeach any of our leaders, let us choose the right crime. When a man breaks into a house and rapes and murders the occupants, the correct charge is not disturbing the peace. Article 2, Section 1 of the United States Constitution says civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason. So the question is simple. What is aid and comfort to the enemy? Who is the enemy? I'm for forming a committee of the House of Representatives to consider charges against all officials, all multinational corporationists who are helping the enemy. We were asked many times during the campaign, well, if the American Party got in office, what would you do? I said, well, that sort of makes me feel like a mosquito at a nudist camp. I know what I ought to do, but I hardly know where to begin. For many years, many of us have said over and over, what counts is the man, not the party. Vote for the man. Having said that many times, I now think that I was wrong. What counts is not the man. What counts is the principle. Neither men nor parties are to be fully trusted. Millions of Americans now know that the two major political parties in this country stand for nothing except getting power and keeping it. Millions of Americans know in their hearts that many of the men they put their faith in could not stand the pressures of office, the heady fumes of power. So what's the answer? What or who can the people believe in? The people can believe in the party, the American Party, because the American Party is the only political party in this country which stands on immutable, irrevocable, unchangeable principles, win or lose. These principles and positions are now being written into our Constitution and our permanent platform. Conditions, of course, constantly change, but eternal verities remain forever the same, like Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. There are a few among us who merely want to be part of a political movement, wheeling and dealing. Some men die by shrapnel, some men die in flames. Most men die inch by inch, playing little games. Those who want to play little games have no business in the American Party. I'd like to give you a few examples of the permanent platform we are now writing. It shall be unlawful to draft a man to fight an undeclared war. Isn't it? It's not only illegal, unconstitutional, it's downright criminal that we have sacrificed 55,000 American lives in a war that our Congress never had the integrity to declare. No excuse for it. Not only a war we wouldn't declare, not only a war we didn't try to win, but a war in which we helped the enemy all the way. There should be treason trials on that. During that whole 12 years and the 20 years beyond it, the United States of America, the big business of America, the leaders of America, built the Russian economic establishment. Russia would still be an agrarian society if it weren't for us. They estimate that 80 to 83% of the supplies going down the Ho Chi Minh Trail all those years and into the Haiphong Harbor came from Russia. Conceivably, American material being used to kill American men. If that's not treason, I want to know what is. So the President of the United States, the conservative anti-communist, goes and embraces the greatest murderer in human history. Can you imagine what would have happened in 1942-45 if Franklin Roosevelt had gone and put his arm around Adolf Hitler and made a trade pact with him Adolf Hitler as a murderer was a piker in comparison with Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong has murdered an estimated 40 million to 60 million of his own people. The crime of some of those people was that they were old and infirm and unable to serve this state, and yet they're murdered and their bodies ground up and spread on the land for fertilizer. And the President of the United States went and put his arm around him in your name. He sold out the millions of enslaved behind the Iron Curtain, and a lot of people have forgotten that. Our first line of defense is not our missiles. Our first line of defense is those millions of enslaved in Eastern Europe. And if Russia... They could be the greatest deterrent from Russia attacking us, but not if we're going to get in bed with their bitterest enemies. He sold out the enslaved of the world, he sold out the American taxpayer, and he sold out the American working man by lowering the bars to permit hundreds of millions of dollars of slave-made merchandise to be shipped into this country to compete with American labor. Another plank, It shall be unlawful for the President of the United States to send troops into any foreign country for more than 72 hours without a declaration of war by the Congress. Another plank, kill all foreign aid. The United States shall not be a member of any world organization which infringes the sovereignty of the United States. The American Party is opposed to busing. In fact, the American Party is opposed to the federal government having anything whatsoever to do with schools at any level. The word education is not even mentioned in the Constitution. The American Party is for taking the federal government out of welfare completely. The American Party is for capital punishment and against abortion. Isn't it ironic and predictable that almost without exception the so-called liberals are for sparing the life of Charles Manson or Richard Speck, who murdered those 8 nurses just for the fun of it, and for taking the life of an innocent baby in the womb? The American Party is against gun controls. I'm a great advocate of law and order. But if the time comes when you haven't got a gun and they've got gun controls, that's the time to buy one. And instead of golf or tennis, why not take up another beneficial, invigorating, and more relevant sport, target practice? The American Party is opposed to trade, recognition, or anything with any slave state. What's a slave state? The best definition I know is, can you get out? Now, I don't mean buy your way out like on ransom like the Jews are having to do in Russia today. If you got $40,000 and if they don't have to have you to run some of the machinery we gave them, then you can get out. And incidentally, why all the emphasis just on Jews? Why can't Christians get out? "99% of the people behind the Iron Curtain are slaves. They can't get out. Why don't we insist that they've all got to be able to leave? Or we won't recognition." The American Party is for the United States of America being first in both offense and defense against any conceivable array of enemies. The American Party thinks it should be illegal for any administration to incur a budget deficit except in time of declared war. Many people still don't know that the conservative Richard Nixon is the greatest spender, war or peace, in human history. It's hard for us to realize. Do you realize that Lyndon Johnson presided over the first $100 billion budget? That's how fast it's going. And now they can't live within a $237 billion budget. The American Party is opposed to central banks, the Federal Reserve or any other central bank. And would return the control of the money to the Congress where the Founding Fathers intended. The American Party would curb inflation by taking a meat axe to government spending, by a drastic reduction in the size and scope of government, and by stopping the Federal Reserve from running those money presses over time. The classic definition of inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. And Richard Nixon would halt inflation by putting a ceiling price and wage controls on He knows better than that. He knows that causes it. That's like trying to force a top on a boiling kettle without taking the heat off the bottom. The explosion is inevitable. They are doing that to bring us to a completely regimented society, and they are doing it deliberately. The American Party would kill the federal income tax. Completely, and depend on the states, as our founding fathers intended, to hand out whatever they think the federal government needs. Now, there are some moderates on our executive committee who would not kill the income tax, but would reduce it to 10%. You know, that's biblical. 10% across the board for everybody. I won't argue about it. I'll take either one of them. The American Party would sell off the 3,000 some odd businesses owned by the federal government, which are nowhere authorized in the Constitution, and make taxpayers out of them instead of tax eaters. I've had many people ask me, well, how do I know if the American Party got in office, you wouldn't do the same thing the others have done? That's a very valid question. How do they know it? We are writing this in blood. These principles are going to be adopted by our convention, and it will take 80% of the national convention to change any one of them. And if an alteration is made, 80% of the states have to ratify that. Every American Party candidate is going to have to sign a pledge that he supports these principles, and if he renounces or fails to support them, the party's support will be automatically withdrawn. So that we can go to the American people and say, if this is what you want, and I'm convinced a large plurality and possibly a majority of the American people want to return to the eternal verities that built this country, if you vote for the American Party, you will know that's what you're going to get. I was asked many times by reporters, well, don't you know that in modern times a third party has never been successful in this country? And I said, well, that's absolutely untrue. The most successful party in this country is the Socialist Party. It hasn't lost an election since 1932. When Norman Thomas disbanded the Socialist Party, he said he did so because it had served its purpose. The Republicans and Democrats had stolen the entire program. Now, the American Party is in this thing to win elections. I'm one of the poorest losers that ever came down the road. And we are building a party in 50 states from the bottom up, not the top down. Not for 76, but for 73, 74, and from then on. But whether we win or lose, if we never accomplished any more than the Socialist Party did, the cause would have been well justified. If we could bring the Republicans and Democrats back to the Constitution, they don't even pretend to believe in the Constitution anymore. Senator Fulbright has said, quote, the Constitution is an outdated instrument written for an agrarian society and unsuitable for our time. And that's what most of them think. Man's freedom was bestowed by God at the time he created man. Genesis 1:26. God made man a free, self-conscious, self-determinate, divine individual. Genesis 1:26, 2:16, and 17. Communism, denying God, necessarily denies the divine right of man to be free. Some fellow travelers and bleeding hearts and do-gooders equate communism and Christianity. Communism and Christianity are opposites. They cannot possibly coexist. One world brotherhood is made of the devil, not of God. God believes in nationalism. Deuteronomy 32:8 and Amos 3:3. God divided the people into nations to keep them from being destroyed. Genesis 9. Internationalism is Satan's program, not God's. Isaiah 14:12. In Genesis 11:1-9, internationalism brought on wickedness and rejection of God, and it has ever since. God decried internationalism at the Tower of Babel, scattering the human race and even giving peoples different languages to hinder their communication. God even established political boundaries in order to encourage peoples to seek the Lord. Richard Nixon has always been for one world government. He's promoted Atlantic Union. He's promoted the United Nations all his political life. The United Nations is opposed to religious freedom, freedom of speech, prayer, ownership of personal property, the right to criticize government, nationalism, local police, sanctity and security of the home, the profit motive, and the right to withdraw from the United Nations. All of those rights are God-given, and any organization or person opposing them is evil. It is unscriptural for a Christian to support and defend this godless, Christ-hating organization. For the Bible says, "Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers." The United Nations goal is one world. World Army, World Navy, World Schools, World Taxes, World Courts, World Firing Squads, and a World Church minus Christ. Satan even had the audacity to try to bribe and brainwash Jesus Christ with his immoral one-world diabolical system. Whereas he failed with Christ, he has succeeded with every president since Franklin Roosevelt, and with most of the high echelons of our government, bureaucracy, press, pulpits, networks, and so-called educators. The United Nations and its bedmates, the CFR, Atlantic Unionists, World Federalists, the Plague of Women Voters, the National and World Council of Churches, our Marxist infiltrated State Department, educational establishment, and their so-called liberal cohorts are universally, consciously, and unconsciously, and unceasingly working to implement the devil's long-standing goals to kill God and Christianity, marriage, family, home, patriotism, private ownership of property, morality, and to promote sexual promiscuity, homosexuality, and permissiveness. The United Nations is a nest of spies, saboteurs, prostitutes, procurers, pimps, propagandists, drug smugglers, living here at our expense and with diplomatic and police immunity. They are cosmopolitan, erudite people, though. Each one knows how to lie in several languages. Approximately 40% of the staff of the United Nations are communists, many of them trained in espionage. 2/3 of the so-called member nations don't pay their dues. Nobody except Americans would originate, house, promote, pay for, and obey an immoral, godless, debating society dedicated to destroying their host nation. Is the United Nations actually any better than its architect, Alger Hiss? We jailed him. No person and no nation can be in bed with the devil without being contaminated. And no nation can be in the United Nations without being contaminated. My time is drawing short. You know, making a speech is sort of like spelling the word banana. The main thing you need to know is when to stop. The great issue of our time, as Dr. Bob Jones and others have indicated, is not education versus ignorance. In spite of what the eggheads try to tell us, most of the educated people in the world are the most wicked. Some of the most educated people in the world are the most wicked. Empty bellies are not, as our materialists say, the cause of communism, nor wars. Germany started 2 wars on a full belly. The communists and fellow travelers throughout the world are mostly full-bellied. The great issue of our time is not economic. It's moral. We have one problem which far overshadows all others, and that is erosion of our national morality. Some people argue that the majority wants this. That's a lot of bunk. The majority doesn't want this. The majority doesn't know what it wants and never has. History is not made by majorities. History is made by dedicated minorities. The silent majority has never saved any country and never will. The silent majority watched as the Christians were burned at the stake. The silent majority sat by and saw him crucified. The silent majority sneered when Patrick Henry asked, "Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery?" The silent majority watched as the street demonstrations in Germany were taken over by a little unknown paper hanger and corporal named Adolf Hitler. The silent majority is yellow and always has been. History is made by dedicated minorities and even by inspired individuals. Only a few proclaimed, "He is our risen Lord." Only a few defended the bridge at Concord. Only a few signed the Declaration of Independence. Enough dedicated ants can whip an elephant. More and more Americans are beginning to believe that only a miracle can save us. It would be well to remember that miracles come only from God, and then only in answer to prayers that are heartfelt, repentant, and accompanied by enlightened action. Education without action is unavailing. Once a great actor was asked to entertain at a large dinner party. He rose and said, "I would like to recite the 23rd Psalm," which he did eloquently. When he was through, there was great applause and a standing ovation. The next speaker on the program was a little white-haired man bent by many years of patient labor as a missionary. He said, "I, too, would like to recite the Shepherd's Psalm." With his head slightly raised and his eyes closed, he began. When he was through, there was no applause, not a sound, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Someone asked the great actor, "I don't understand. Your recitation was perfect in every way. Yet when he said the same thing in his halting, imperfect manner, the audience was too moved for words." What made the difference? The actor said, "Well, the answer is simple. I know the Shepherd's Psalm, but he knows the shepherd." We cannot win without the shepherd, and with him we cannot lose. Thank you.
Norris told me to give you his personal regard.
Oh, fine. Thank you.